Greetings one and all. Super Mondays here in the Holy Apple, in the Holy Land, on the Holy Hilltop. We are on the 14th day of the month of Kislev. That's right, 11 days away from the holiday of Hanukkah. And today's class, aside for the fact that it's always for the sake of heaven and to bring the divine presence out of the exile. It's a special day for me. This is 6 years ago, my brother, Moshe Richter, he passed away at a relatively young age. He was in his 50s, and he was a special person. He was born with he was born handicapped, also mentally handicapped, or I think they call it today challenged. And this was the day 6 years ago where he passed away in an institution near Ramat Beit Shemesh in Israel. He merited to come to Israel with my parents 22 years ago. And may this class be for an elevation of his dear soul. Okay, get excited. We have it's probably going to be 2 or 3 parts. It's very, very exciting material. There's many foundations and principles here to be learned. So bring a seatbelt, and you have to sit down, and you have to go over it, and you have to listen the whole way through. I wish there was a shortcut out, but you really, in order to get to be fulfilled here in the class, you really have to hear it from the beginning until the end. And I pray that, first of all, I thank God for sending me this material, this information, these ideas, and I believe, with God's help, that these are true and very important ideas for our times. So, with no further ado, let's go on. The title of these classes will be Breaking News: Messianic Elections of 2020. Who really won? Okay, we have to remember, number one, the elections took place on November 3rd. That week, the portion that we read in the Torah was the portion of Vayera. At the end of the portion, it's a fundamental reading of the binding of Isaac. We know that from that period in history, when it actually took place, when Abraham binded his son Isaac and brought him up to Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the temple in the future would stand, that merit of the binding of Isaac continues till this very second and moment. It is a spotlight during our services on Rosh Hashanah, when God is judging the world. So this is, we say it every single day in our prayers in the morning, prayers. So this is very basic foundation of Judaism. And that was the week that the elections took place. So remember that. It was one of perhaps the greatest event ever in Jewish history. Remember that. Okay. We know that there is a dispute going on, at least for a large segment of America. There is a big dispute going on. Who won the elections? And we will see, according to our sources, according to Jewish sources, to Mashiach, Messianic sources, we will see that there's a reason for this dispute. There is a reason for this dispute. It's not a simple election. Who won? Not a simple question, not a simple answer. Okay. The symbol of the winning party, the Democratic Party, is a donkey. Number one. Number two, the winner of the elections so far that we know, the winner of the elections was a person named Joseph Biden, a Roman Catholic president. Joseph, his first name, is in the Torah the symbol, the icon of Joseph on the flag of Joseph in the desert. The icon was an ox. So once again, we have the Democratic Party, their icon is a donkey. And then we have Joseph. Joseph's icon was an ox. And as we'll see, very dangerous, mixing a donkey with an ox. As the class progresses, we will see one of the prohibitions of the Torah is you are not allowed to plow a field with an ox and donkey together. Step 3. The Muslim community in America overwhelmingly voted for Joseph Biden, Joe Biden. And I'm reading here from a magazine called Arab News. I'm summarizing. 70% of American Muslims voted Biden. 17% voted for Trump. This was the largest turnout for the Muslim community of America. Over 1 million Muslims voted in the 2020 elections. We had a class about 2 years ago. We spoke about don't fear the Mexican emigration and immigration into the States so much, because up and coming is the Muslim immigration to America. That's what you should be more fearful of. 4 years ago, in the 2016 elections, there were similar results within the Muslim community. Once again, approximately 70% for the Democratic Party and 17% for the Republican Party. So we see clearly here that the Muslims voted overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. Now, this is very interesting because the Torah teaches us that the symbol of Ishmael, the father of the Muslim world, is also a donkey. So you have the Muslim population who their icon is a donkey, just similar to the Democratic Party. And once again, we have at the top of the Democratic Party, we have Joseph the ox symbol, the icon. Once again, very dangerous. More amazingly, when we have all these, I was thinking of a different word, but maybe we might have kids listening to this, so I'm not going to use it. A different word for donkeys. We have a lot of donkeys running around during these elections. Number one, as we mentioned, during the binding of Isaac, a major character in the binding ceremony is, of course, the donkey. And then our Talmud tells us that Ishmael, father of the Muslim world, is likened to a donkey. It's a nation that is likened to the donkey. Am hadomeh lechamor. That's what's learned out in the portion that we read during the elections. That week of the elections. Amazing. Not only that, we have another very interesting connection between Ishmael and also donkey, not only in the Talmud or in the mystical writings, but it's a straight verse from Job. If we compare two verses, number 1, Genesis chapter 16, verse 12. There, when Ishmael is born, he is compared to a wild man. He is called a wild man. The word wild appears also in the book of Job, in chapter 11, verse 12. A small donkey is likened to a wild man. That is the verse. Ayar pere Adam. So once again, this connection is a verse. It uses the expression, the wild man. That expression is only used once when we're talking about Ishmael, father of the Muslims. And once again, in Job, he is compared to a small donkey. The Gra, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, in his majestic work, Yahel Or, he writes at the beginning of the portion of Bo in the book of Exodus, Ishmael is likened to a donkey. He is the major source of impurity in the world. Once again, you might have to clean your ears out for that one. Ishmael is likened to a donkey. He is the major source of impurity in the world. Okay, so the Muslims voted for Biden. Next, we have another donkey. A donkey represents, in Torah language, a donkey represents hatred of the religious, of the learned Jew by the assimilated Jews. Where do we see this? We see this very clearly from, believe it or not, none other than Rabbi Akiva. Now, don't have a heart attack here. Hold on to your wig. This is, of course, before Rabbi Akiva became a legend and a Torah scholar, and he repented, of course. We're on the tractate of Psachim. We are on page 49, side B. It says there in the Talmud an amazing thing that Rabbi Akiva said about himself when he was an ignorant Jew. He himself hated the learned Jews, the religious Jews, and he would, if he had the opportunity, he would bite them like a donkey. So the Talmud asks, why like a donkey? How about when we think about bites, you think more about dogs. I have a few kids that learn in school with me, and they've been bitten over the past year by dogs, not by donkeys. So it's very unusual that Rabbi Akiva picked the animal of the donkey to express his hatred when he was younger against the learned and religious Jews. So the Talmud asks, why don't you bite them like a dog? So Rabbi Akiva answered, at that point of my life, a dog bite hurts, but the donkey, when the donkey bites, they destroy the bones. And that's how much I hated them. Now, folks, donkey. It says in the commentary on Psalms by Rabbi Yitzchak Chiyut, he tells us an amazing line on this. He tells us, why did the Talmud use the expression donkey? Because a donkey represents Yishmael. And there's something about Yishmael. Yishmael has two sides. Yishmael has one side where he presents himself as the bastion of kindness. We know till this very day, the Muslim world, they are very hospitable. Hachnasat orchim. However, that is a face that they put on. But behind that mask of kindness, where they received that from Abraham, their kindness really is a form of tremendous impurity, which we will talk about later. What is the flip side of their kindness, which is so impure? Remember that. We'll get to it soon. So therefore, the Talmud asks a question in another tractate, in the tractate of Yevamot, page 62b. The Tosfot says, I don't understand, how could it be that Rabbi Akiva, this was his attitude towards the religious community, to the learned? How could this be? We were told in the Talmud that he was ignorant of Torah, but he was a person of tremendous characteristic traits and mannerism. He was refined. This is not a refined person. Give me a righteous Jew. I want to bite him like a donkey. So the Tosfot answers there an amazing answer. You know why Rabbi Akiva despised so much the righteous and the learned? Because of the fact that he disguised it. He himself, when he would be asked about it, he would explain it that he's really out to protect and to protest against the treatment of the religious community against ignorant Jews. So that is why the Talmud uses the expression donkey, because donkey, the symbol, the icon of Yishmael, that is a mask of kindness. Only later on did Rabbi Akiva realize what the real reason behind his hatred was. But there is no contradiction, the Tosfot says, to Rabbi Akiva being a refined person. Because he was refined, that's why, even though it's misguided and mistaken, that is why he had no problem going out and making a statement that if I saw one of these learned people, I would bite them like a donkey. The Talmud concludes with an amazing statement. The hatred of the Gentiles against the Jewish people is nothing compared to the hatred of the ignorant Jews against fellow learned, righteous, religious Jews. Amazing statement. The hatred of the world against the Jewish people is less than the hatred of the ignorant Jews against their own people. How many times have we seen that in history? So, donkey represents hatred of religious Jews, which is an amazing thing, because right now, especially because of the COVID-19 situation, the religious community all over in Israel and also in America and different places are facing tremendous anti-Semitic backlash because of the COVID-19. The religious communities in all over the world are being pointed out by officials, by governments, by populations as being the cause, the spreaders of the COVID-19. Look, the synagogues and the yeshivas and the Jewish schools, prayers all clamped down against the Jewish religious community. Okay, the last donkey that we have is the tribe of Issachar. The tribe of Issachar represents the religious community. Issachar was the pyramid of Torah learning. They were the leaders of Torah learning within the Jewish people. There is a famous partnership. It's called Yisachar and Zvulun. Zvulun went out to work and he supported the Torah of Yisachar. So Yisachar is in the end of Genesis, when Jacob is blessing his sons, he blesses the tribe, the Torah tribe of Yisachar. He uses the expression chamor garem, donkey, because of the fact that the Torah world, the Torah scholars, they have a tremendous yoke, like a donkey, that carries the heaviest loads across the world. Also, the Torah scholars carry the Jewish people, the load of Torah, the yoke of heaven on them, and their responsibilities to the Jewish community, to the world, to God, is so great. It's likened to the load and burden on a donkey's back. So who won the elections? It's complicated. We have the Democratic Party, donkey. We have Joe Biden, Joseph with the ox. We have the Muslim community backing the Democratic Party. Donkey is their icon. We have the hatred against religious Jews, the donkey in the time of Rabbi Akiva, and we have, of course, the donkey that represents the Torah and the Torah Jews, religious community, and the sages. So, who won the elections? To make things perhaps more complicated, once again, keep in mind always that the portion that we read during the week of the elections on November 3rd was Vayera, and the gem, the cherry on top of the cake, is the binding of Isaac. There we see very clearly how in the spotlight is the donkey representing Yishmael, representing the Muslim world. So, the Yalkut Shimoni on 575, based on a verse in Zechariah 9:9, tells us an amazing thing. If you have a dream, and in your dream you see, I have a dream that one day I will see a donkey. If you see a donkey in your dream, this is a sign that the redemption is near. If you see a donkey, folks, if you're not out of your seats, if you're not dancing around your house, if you're in a lockdown or if outside, go dance. Amazing. Donkey. All of these icons during this past election. Get ready for redemption. Or in Tractate Brachot, Blessings 56, side B, if you dream of a donkey, prepare yourself for salvation. So either redemption and salvation. Amazing thing. That is when you see the donkey being victorious, winning in your dreams. This is a tremendous sign. The Zohar HaKadosh and the Arizal tell us that there are two messiahs. One is the Messiah of Joseph and one is the Messiah of David. What are their icons, their symbols? Joseph's symbol, as we mentioned before, is an ox. David's symbol is a donkey. In this week's portion of Vayishlach, listen closely. When Jacob is about to meet up with Esau, he prepares a speech and he prepares a gift for Esau. And the first thing he says, I have with me donkeys and ox. Donkey and an ox. What is that message? What is the message? He had a lot of animals with him in his present that he prepared to present to Esau. First thing that he says, it's so important. Why is that? Amazing. Because of the fact that he was hinting to Esau, his brother, listen, for 20 years I was in the White House, I mean the house of Lavan. And Lavan, he was the head of the magicians, black magic. And he did everything in his power through this magic and black magic to try and defeat and destroy Jacob. How did he try to do that? By uniting the donkey and the ox. He tried doing it spiritually, but spiritually from the impure side. There is, when God created the world, there is power that God gave the evil side, the evil inclination to do battle against us. So, Lavan, he tried everything possible during those 20 years to unite the ox with the donkey. He knew that would destroy the world and Jacob. So, Jacob comes to Esau and he wants to make him fearful. He wants to put the fear of God to him. He says, I rule over the ox and the donkey. Just like Lavan was not able to unite them, you will also not be able to unite them against me in your fight against me, Jacob and the Jewish people. Folks, I believe that there was a tremendous message in these elections. We will see shortly. I'm just going to mention it now, but we will see shortly, more expanded. The time of the binding of Isaac. This was an opportunity. This was a chance for the donkey, Ishmael, who was chased away, expelled by his parents, Abraham and Sarah, stamped by God. Years went by. We will get to the story later. Trust me now. But this was, when it came to the binding of Isaac, Ishmael, the father of the Muslim world, comes back to the spotlight. This was his chance. This was an opportunity. But it was an opportunity that turned around, and instead of stepping into the spotlight, into stardom, it was the fall of the donkey. So at the beginning of the binding of Isaac, when it first started to play out on New Year's, according to most opinion, that happened on the New Year, Rosh Hashanah. So when it began to play out, those first few days, this was the opportunity that once again the donkey, Ishmael, was being brought up to a high plateau, only to find his downfall from the heights. So folks, I think it's very clear here that yes, the Democratic Party has stepped into the limelight, the spotlight. They are on the heights. But what they represent, their principles, their morals, what they stand for, they are about to bring a tremendous crash to not only their party, which is represented, Democratic Party, which their icon is the donkey. They are about to bring the entire America, unfortunately, down to its knees. I say unfortunately because the fact that there are some 6 million Jews that are in America. That is the unfortunate part. Folks, to show this, to bring in another homer, another Grand Slam here, let me read an article. This was 5 years ago by Rivka Adler. Listen closely. One of the most prominent personalities who offered Pollard emotional and spiritual support during his decades in prison was Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu. Rabbi Eliyahu served as chief rabbi in Israel from 1983 to 1993 and had a close and supportive relationship with Pollard for 20 years. Rabbi Eliyahu passed away 10 years ago. Shortly after Rabbi Eliyahu's death, Jonathan's wife Esther began to speak out about the spiritual messages that Rabbi Mordechai shared with them. In an article published by the YWN, the Yeshiva World News, on June 11, 2010, Esther shared Rabbi Eliyahu's prediction that the eventual release of Jonathan Pollard is connected to the final redemption. Quote, Esther, over time, the rabbi shared with us and with a few others who were very close to the rabbi that Jonathan's release is a key to the redemption of all the Jewish people. He taught us how Jonathan's release is also the key to the release of all of Israel's captives and MIAs. Once Jonathan is out, all the captives will shortly be out. Once they are all out, we are in redemption. Perhaps most significant of all, the rabbi always referred to Jonathan as the Joseph, the righteous Joseph of our generation. Joseph, of course, was also sat in prison for 12 years. In August of 2010, Esther Pollard sent her husband a birthday letter, which he released for publication. In there, she strengthened her husband's spirits with the words of Rabbi Eliyahu. You are a cosmic key to the redemption of the Jewish people. Your release is synonymous with the release of the Shekhinah, the divine presence from exile. Your release is tied with Messiah, the son of David's return to the world, to the land. Your release is bound to the redemption of the land of Israel and the people of Israel. Folks, amazing. This seems to be clear that the release of Jonathan Pollard the past week, 1 week ago, was symbolized the end of the period of MBJ, Messiah, the son of Joseph. There are two periods of time in Jewish thought of the Messiah. One is Joseph, the Messiah of Joseph. That represents the physical building of the land of Israel, bringing us a physical redemption to the Jewish people, which we see very clearly in the land of Israel today, in the state of Israel today. But after that is done, after that stage is over, we must go forward to the next stage. That is the Messiah of David's stage. That is a spiritual stage. So just as we said, during the week of the elections, there was a tremendous elevation of Yishmael, of the Muslim world, of the donkey, just to find the fall. And then the release of Jonathan Pollard, who was in our days, he is the Joseph that was released from prison. And our redemption by Messiah of David is dependent on his release, the release of Joseph. Once Joseph is released, then it's time for David, who represents, of course, the donkey, as it says in the Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin 98b, that the Messiah comes riding, the Messiah of David comes riding on a donkey. Okay. The Arizal, in his book, the book of Likutim, in the book of Samuel, chapter 9, writes the following. Listen to this. Donkeys represent 10 crowns of impurity in the world. Amazing. As we know, there are 10 spiritual realms, sfirot we call, that God created the world. It starts with the highest, the loftiest, is chokhmah, knowledge, and it goes down to kingdom, to the malchut. There are 10 spheres. And the Arizal tells us a tremendous secret, that donkeys represent the 10 impure, to every pure characteristic trait, to a pure sphere in the spiritual world. There is an impure sphere that is trying to devour the pure one. So you have 10 levels of impurity, and you have 10 levels of purity, and they go and they battle it out. So very interesting. Donkeys represent the 10 levels of impurity. And it's amazing. If we look in this week's portion, when Jacob is sending a present to his brother Esau, how many male donkeys does he send? He sends 10. He sends his brother 10, meaning, in a secret meaning here, you have no chance against me because you represent Esau. Esau, you represent the 10 levels, the 10 spheres, spiritual spheres of impurity. And that's why I'm sending you 10 donkeys. Folks, this is amazing. Now we can understand why the Torah bothers to tell us that Bilam, who came to curse the Jewish people, who cares what his form of transportation was? Why does the Torah bother to tell us that he was traveling on a donkey? Well, it bothered to tell us because of the fact that more than any other person, Bilam represented impurity in the world. Not only that, I know we might have kids that are watching this class, so I'm not going to go into details, but there were many impure, we'll just leave it at that. There were many impure acts that Bilam did with his donkey. So we see this impurity here. So the Arizal continues. He ain't finished yet. Not finished yet. And he tells us that Esau's angel, who came to fight against Jacob, you know why he came? Because of this message that Jacob was going to send his brother, that you represent Esau, you represent donkeys, you represent the 10 impure levels in the world. And the angel of Esau said that now we will have a battle royal. We will see who is the impurity in the world. Is it Esau or is it you, Jacob? Perhaps you represent the 10 levels. As we know, as we said, the Jewish people, Jacob himself, blessed his son, one of his leading sons, Yisachar, the leaders of Torah and the Jewish people, that tribe of Yisachar. He blessed them with the blessing of the donkey, because we know that of all the impure animals, there is only one that has a ceremony to be redeemed. There is something good, there is something holy that is within this impurity. It's tremendous amount of impurity, but there's something within this 99.9% of impurity. There is something holy within the donkey. And that was the blessing of Jacob to his son, taking upon ourselves the yoke, just like the donkey takes upon himself tremendous burden. So, that was the fight. The angel of Esau came to fight against Jacob. Who is bringing impurity to the world? Who is bringing this impurity to the world? Jacob says, you, Esau. And the angel of Esau turns around and points it back to Jacob. So once again, we said, who won these elections? Hard to know. There's a dispute. Just like there's a dispute in the world today, there's a dispute because there's a battle going on between Esau and Jacob. Who represents impurity? Is it the donkey of Esau, or is it the pure side of the donkey which Jacob represents? Who is going to win this battle? Not a simple battle. We know that Jacob was injured. Okay, so we see once again in these elections, the Democratic Party wins, symbolizing the donkey. We quoted the Arizal, who's telling us that the 10 levels of impurity are represented by the donkey. That is what we could expect from the Democrats. Their icon being the donkey. That's who they represent. And that is why they will bring down the downfall of America. The book Yalkut Ruveni, on this week's portion, Vayishlach, paragraph 8, he brings down an amazing, the same kind of concept that the Arizal, that there are two sides of the donkey. There is the overwhelming side of the impurity, and there is a small side of goodness, purity. So this is brought down. Yalkut Ruveni writes that there is a good side of the donkey. That is represented, the word donkey. If the numerical value of donkey without the vav, because if you look at the commandment to redeem the firstborn donkey, you'll see that it's spelled without a vav. So that comes out to 248. Abraham, the word Abraham, the numerical value is 248. Okay? If you turn around the letters of a donkey, it comes to mercy. Chamor turns into Rachem. Rachem, Rachem, Rachem na Hashem Elokeinu, Rachem. No extra charge. Right. So amazing. So this Chamor, there is a good side. 248 for the donkey, 248 for Abraham. Turn those letters around, it comes out to mercy. On the other side, on the flip side, there's the bad side of the donkey, that Yalkut Ruveni, that of course is represented by Ishmael. This concept is also brought down in many and many other books. Just you can check it out in Asara Mamarot, 10 paragraphs by the Ramah of Pano. So once again, there is a battle here. There's a dispute going on between the donkeys. Who is going to overcome? The good side of the donkey, which is people of Israel, or the bad side of the donkey, which is represented by Ishmael, the Muslim world, and the symbol of the Democratic Party. Moving right along. A donkey. Remember everything you've heard up till now, all these symbols coming back to us, the donkey. When you see a donkey is a sign of redemption. A donkey is a sign of redeeming the land of Israel. A donkey, when you see a donkey, the reason why it is a symbol of redemption and salvation is because that if we are able to overcome the donkey also is materialism, chomer, chamor, the same exact letters. When it says that the Messiah comes riding on a donkey, believe me folks, he's probably coming in a Ferrari. People don't travel today in donkeys. People think, oh, this is just like, a fairy tale. It ain't no fairy tale. Why does the Torah tell us that he's riding on a donkey? He ain't coming on a donkey. It's a allegory. It's a mashal to a person, a spiritual giant that has overcome, is riding on the materialism. Usually we are destroyed. The materialism rides right over us, destroys us. It's on top and we're on the bottom. We're its slaves. We're enslaved to materialism. Messiah, the materialism is not enslaving him. He is way above that. The materialism does not move him, does not faze him at all. He's able to conquer. That's the idea of the Messiah coming and riding on that donkey, folks. So, listen to this, amazing. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer in chapter 31, an ancient work of the Jewish people, talks about the 10th test of Abraham, which was of course the binding of Isaac. Listen to this. Tells us that this donkey that Abraham took to the binding of Isaac, this is not a regular donkey. This is a donkey that was created in the beginning of the universe, in the creation of the world, in order to bring redemption at different intervals of history. The first interval of history was bringing redemption at the time of the binding of Isaac. That's number one. What redemption was brought to the world at the time? The redemption was, number one, that there was the fall of Ishmael during, as we'll see soon, there was a dispute, there was a contest going on between Isaac and Ishmael. Who would continue? Abraham. Was it going to be Ishmael or was it going to be Isaac? Who would inherit the land of Israel? Was it going to be Isaac or was it going to be Ishmael? There was a battle royal going on here. And in the end, Abraham comes and he's victorious, as is written by the Maharal on his commentary on the Torah. At the end of the binding of Isaac, he says in the verse that God promises Abraham, that your offspring, your people, will conquer the gates of their enemies. And the Maharal writes on that verse that during the time of the binding of Isaac, the Jewish people inherited and won the land of Israel. So the land of Israel was redeemed from the possibility of falling into the hands of Ishmael. The torch, continuing Abraham's work, the torch was decided. The salvation, not only to the Jewish people, but to the world, was decided at this binding of Isaac, where the fall of the donkey, the fall of Ishmael, and the rise of Abraham, the rise of Isaac. So this was the first donkey that represented salvation. The second incident that's brought down here is when the Torah tells us that Moses came with his family on a donkey in order to bring the Jewish people, free the Jewish people from slavery. So, once again, one of the promises that God tells Moses, that you, Moses, do not worry, the Jewish people will be redeemed, and I will bring them into the land of Israel. The idea of going out of Egypt, if everything would have gone according to plan, was to bring the final redemption to the world, to the Jewish people and to the world. So that was the idea. I will bring you out of Egypt and I will bring you into the land of Israel. This was supposed to be not only the redemption of the Jewish people, but the redemption of the land of Israel, which was in the hands at the time of the Exodus, in the hands of the 7 Canaanite nations, trespassers, foreigners in our land. But last but not least, there is one more donkey. This one donkey, so to speak, has brought into the world so far 2 redemptions, salvations. One was during the binding of Isaac. The second was at the time of the Exodus of Egypt. And the third, you guessed it, will be in the time of the coming of Messiah. Once again, with that same donkey that was created at the creation of the world. In the words of the Gra, Rabbi Eliyahu from Vilna, if you look in his book, Safra Ditzniuta, in the 4th chapter, what does it mean the Messiah rides on a donkey? He says it in black and white. Listen to the words. Kibush Ishmael al Yidei Am Yisrael. The conquering of Ishmael, the donkey, the fall of the donkey at the hands of Israel. So, once again, the donkey represents, on one hand, it represents, on one hand, the impurity. It represents the Muslim world. It represents the Democratic Party and what they stand for. All their impurities, what they stand for. On the other hand, the donkey, on its pure side, on its good side, represents redemption, salvation, represents the victory of one type of donkey, the pure and the good side of the donkey, over the evil donkeys. Okay, now we go on to our next point. The binding of Isaac. It was a monumental event, pedestal event in all of Jewish history. We are still meriting this. We still enjoy the merit of this tremendous sacrifice, both of Isaac and Abraham, his father. But what does it stand for? Once again, this is what we read. This is the portion that we read during the week of the elections. So it's the uttermost importance. The binding of Isaac really means filtering out, goodbye, the expulsion of Ishmael, of the donkey, of the Muslim world. Its downfall. Number 1, we quoted a verse at the end of the portion of Vayera. The last few verses. Genesis 22:17. God's angel tells Abraham and Isaac, you will inherit the gateway of your enemies. This is a prophecy of the downfall of Ishmael. As we will soon see, there is in the Torah oyev, an enemy, and a soneh, a hater. And we'll see, is Esav or Ishmael, who's the hater and who is the enemy? So, right now, just take my word for it, we'll see it in black and white. But here, we see the downfall of Ishmael was prophesied during the binding of Isaac, that this day will come. The downfall of the donkey, the downfall of Ishmael. We have the exact words, except for one that switched. Instead of enemy, we have haters. And Rebecca was blessed by her family that her descendants should be victorious, should inherit the gate, the entrance, the gateway to her enemies. This, of course, is Soneh, represents Esav, the world of Esav. As it says, it is known, there is a halacha that Esav hates Jacob. It uses the word hate. So we have enemies and we have haters. This is brought down by Rabbeinu Bachya. Rabbeinu Bachya brings this down in Deuteronomy chapter 30. If I'm not mistaken, it's verse 7. Okay, Rabbeinu Bachya or Chaye, dispute how his name is pronounced. He asked this question: who in the Torah is the enemy? Who in the Torah is the hater? And he says straight out, and he brings various proofs. The enemy is Yishmael. That was the binding of Isaac, his downfall. And the Soneh, the hater, is represented by Esav, the ox. The Kuzari tells us in his beautiful work in chapter 2, paragraph 14, he tells us the following, that he asked a question, what was the dispute? What was the argument between Yishmael and Isaac? And he tells us an amazing thing. What was behind it? The real fight between, the real argument and dispute and battle between Isaac and Ishmael, and the reason why Sarah saw fit to throw him and expel him, was that the battle was who inherits the land of Israel. The battle was a battle for the land of Israel. And we see that a tremendous victory in the binding of Isaac. There was a tremendous victory. Isaac and Abraham were promised to inherit and to be victorious, to liberate the land of Israel from who? From Ishmael. So, during this week, where the donkey, the icon of the Democrat Party, and their supporters of the Muslim world, and Muslims in America specifically, we see that this is temporary. This is a temporary rise, just to make sure their downfall is that great. Because when a person falls, if you fall while standing up, that's not such a big. But if you're on a second story, if you're up on a mountain and you fall, that's when you really get hurt and injured. So that is the Kuzari telling us this was behind the dispute. This idea I heard from Rabbi Daniel Gladstein. Amazing idea. What was the idea behind the binding of Isaac? We know that Sarah told Abraham, we must expel Ishmael. Abraham, he did not find favor. That request did not find favor in his eyes. However, God told him, listen, whatever your wife said, Sarah, listen to what she said. Now, there is a difference between when I do something, even though I really don't want to do it, but what can I do? You know, God told me to listen to my wife, so I got to do it. But I don't do it because that's the way I really believe or feel, or that's my conclusion in life. I just did it because, you know, my wife either, you know, listen to my wife or no supper tonight. So you have a choice. Not so much of a choice. So now, what was the idea? The idea was that this time around, Abraham would have to come to his own conclusion, not that he was pushed into it. Oh, my wife made me do it. Oh, I really didn't want to do it. I don't want to expel Ishmael. No, this time, round 2, ding, 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 ding. Those bells ring. This time it was Abraham had to see for himself. Listen closely. As I promised before, we're missing some information here on what happened in the binding of Isaac. We know that Ishmael was expelled. And how many years passed between his expulsion from his home and the binding of Isaac? There are two major opinions. One is that Ishmael was 27 years old when he was tossed out of his house. Therefore, 23 years later, when he was at the age of 50, came the binding of Isaac. So 23 years had passed since he had been tossed out. According to another opinion, he was 15 years old at the time where he was expelled from his house. Therefore, 35 years had passed till the binding of Isaac. So, let me summarize the words, chapter 31 of Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Amazing. Three years after the expulsion of Abraham's son Ishmael, Abraham goes to visit his son Ishmael in the desert. His wife had told him, listen, you can go to visit, but don't get off your, don't get off your horse, don't get off your camel. Stick on it. There, to make a long story short, Abraham did not meet up with Ishmael. Ishmael was not at home, but he did meet his wife. And boy, was he not pleased with his wife. He saw by her various actions and words, characteristic traits, that she was not fit to be Ishmael, Abraham's son's wife. And he in fact gave over a message via his wife to give to Ishmael, that Ishmael would understand from this encoded message to divorce this woman because she was not a kind person. Okay, that was 3 years. 3 years go by, and Abraham once again gets on his, gets into his Mercedes, and he goes to visit again his son Ishmael. This time, he noticed that his wife was extremely hospitable, and he gave a message that Ishmael should keep this wife because she was a good influence on him. Okay, now years go by. We discussed two opinions. Years go by. Now it's time for Ishmael to come and visit his father. 2 times Abraham goes and he's visiting his son Ishmael. Now it's time for Ishmael. And amazing, the way that God sets it up, it's right in time for what? For the binding of Isaac. Now we understand the dialogue between God and Abraham. Abraham is thinking, God tells Abraham, listen, take your son. And Abraham is thinking, 1 second, this is amazing. After 23 years or after 35 years, all of a sudden, when God is commanding to take my son and bind him and bring him up to the altar, all of a sudden, all these years later, Ishmael appears. This is his light of fame. This is him. So Abraham says, take my son Which one? I have two. Now, in normal circumstances, if Ishmael would have never come and visited at this time, he would have never thought of Ishmael, because so many years had passed that they were not in contact. But all of a sudden, the way that God orchestrates the world, amazing, all the players come together. And then God says to Abraham, oh, you don't know which son? You have a son from Hagar and you have a son from Sarah. Okay, your only son. Your only son. Abraham says, I really don't know who you're talking about, God, because Ishmael is the only child I have from Hagar, and Isaac is the only child I have from Sarah. So you told me son, but I have two. You told me the loan. Both of them are loan to their parents, to their mothers. Oh, and then God says the next words, Asher Ahavta, that you love. I love them both. Oh, and then he says Isaac. Folks, I mean, you can't set this up. You can't make this stuff up. Amazing how it was set up. Abraham, God is giving him this dialogue. So Abraham is thinking, wow, after all these years, Ishmael comes by. It's probably him. He's the continuation. I was right. My wife was wrong. I know that's hard to believe. Sometimes that does happen. The husband is correct and the wife not. But anyways, dear friends. So now, who comes along with Abraham and Isaac to the ceremony? None other than Ishmael, who happens to pop in after all these decades of years. And all of a sudden, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer tells us that Abraham sees the divine presence. He sees spirituality, feels spirituality from a certain mountain in the distance. Happens to be Mount Moriah, where the temple would be, in the future would be built in Jerusalem. And he's so excited, Abraham. He sees where he's supposed to go. He feels a tremendous holiness, a magnet of holiness to that mountain. And then he calls over his son Isaac, and he says, Isaac, can you look out? Giving them binoculars, you know, boom, 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 boom. Can you please tell me what you see over on this mountain? Wow! Dad, amazing! I feel in my soul the spirituality. I see the divine presence on that mountain. Wow, great! And then Abraham turns to his other son, Ishmael. He says, Ishmael, yo, bro, put on those binoculars. Let's look. What do you see over there, my dear son Ishmael? I don't see nothing. I don't see nothing. What? You don't see anything? And then Abraham tells him, Ishmael, you ain't going any further. You sit with the donkey. And there is where the expression, the nation, which is likened, their icon, is the icon of the donkey. You are likened to the donkey, means spiritually you are extremely materialistic. You are caught up in all of your desires. All of this word, the word donkey in the holy tongue, means materialism, means desires, etc. That's what it's talking. That's what it's talking about. Not that the Muslims are a bunch of donkeys, what the donkey represents. So, folks, all of a sudden, All of a sudden, Abraham gets it. Before, some 20, 30 years ago, his wife kind of pushed him into expelling Ishmael. But Abraham wasn't really keyed to that. But now he understands, he realizes what was behind the statement of his wife and why God gave it a stamp. Because now he understands that this binding of Isaac is the downfall of the donkey, is the downfall of Ishmael from now on. The liberators, the owners of the land of Israel, of course, are the Jewish people, are Isaac's people. The continuation, the Torah of Abraham will be passed down, not to Ishmael, will be passed down to Isaac, and then forward it till our times. The Maharal explains, when we use the term, the icon of Ishmael, the Muslim world, being the donkey, what does that mean spiritually? So the Emunat Eliezer, based on the Maharal in chapter 5 in the book Gvurot Hashem, Emunat Eliezer, the book, on page 35, he says the following: a donkey symbolizes running after material and bodily pleasures. The Egyptians we have to realize that when we're talking about Egyptians, we're once again bringing it back to Ishmael, because Abraham's wife, Hagar, she was the princess of Egypt. She represents Egypt. And it says in the prophet Ezekiel, it says there, I'm pretty sure on chapter 22 in Ezekiel, the Egyptians are compared to donkeys when it comes to sexual promiscuity. Abraham represents chesed, kindness. However, kindness without borders is extremely dangerous, because in the Torah, in Leviticus, in the portion of Acharei Mot, the Torah tells us that prostitution, it uses the word chesed, kindness. If you think about it, what is prostitution? Prostitution is that giving your body, your love, to everyone and anyone. That is kindness without borders. That is prostitution. You give your body to whoever pays money. So, once again, Ishmael represents the donkey, running after desires, material pleasures. He represents impurity, sexual impurity, promiscuity. It says in Tractate of Kiddushin, page 49, it's written there that there were 10 levels of prostitution that were given to the world. Nine of them, the Yishmaelim, the Muslim world, took 9 of them. So that's what they represent, as the prophet Ezekiel saw it very clearly. They represent sexual promiscuity. So the book Emunat Eliezer, he brings down at the end, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, represents the filtering out of Ishmael, leaving only Isaac. The book, Emunat, we'll leave that. Okay, the last 2 points, and then we'll call a break here for part 1. When Abraham calls Isaac and he asks him to look towards Jerusalem, look to Mount Moriah, do you see anything? And Isaac immediately, he felt the magnetic spiritual connection to that place. He felt the divine presence when he looked in that direction. However, then Abraham calls over his other son, Ishmael, and he asks him to look in that direction. And he sees nothing. What does that mean? It means very clearly, this is brought down in the book Korban Eliyahu by the famous Rabbi Eliyahu of Izmir, the Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen of Izmir, who wrote many books such as the famous ethical book Shevet Musar. So he writes in his book Korban Eliyahu on the Exodus portion of Bo, he writes that this shows us that there is no connection between Ishmael, the Muslim world, and the land of Israel and the Temple Mount. They get up, today they claim this is their land, God forbid. They call it the P name, and they claim that the Mount of Temple Mount is theirs. We see very clearly why they changed it around in their Quran. Why did they have to change it around? Because it's clear that we see the conclusion of the binding of Isaac is that the world, the Muslim world, Ishmael, the father of the Muslim world,